You've probably heard of the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. What you may not know is his son Stephen Jr. wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And in that book, he makes the argument that when trust is lacking, things move more slowly and things cost a lot more. But when there's trust involved, it kind of lubricates the system. It makes things move smoothly, move quickly, and that means that things are less costly because you're able to move more nimbly because there's a built-in level of trust. You don't have to sit around and wait for people to prove themselves or make sure that they're competent or whatever. So I was reading that book, I just kept reflecting over and over again on the state of church in North America and how there is such a lack of trust among churches. Churches just don't do things together. Churches don't pool resources. Churches don't combine. Churches would rather split due to lack of trust rather than combine due to having a high degree of trust. And that lack of trust is slowing us down in our mission, and that lack of trust is making things exponentially more expensive. Imagine with a high degree of trust, the way that we could cooperate with one another, share resources, share leadership and things like that, share facilities. We would have so much less expense and so much more efficiency that we would be able to be more highly obedient to what Jesus told us in the Great Commission, that it makes all the sense in the world that we should be trying to build trust with one another rather than build suspicion. It seems to me in reading Acts that there was a high degree of trust in the early church. Now, that was not always the case. There were certain instances of mistrust, like when Saul is converted and he needs Barnabas to speak up for him, but he had someone to speak up for him, someone to vouch for him and say, you can trust this man. But we don't seem to have that today. And if that person existed, they wouldn't carry a lot of weight. If they were to say, well, you can trust the church across town, we need to combine efforts. I've actually seen people try to do this and were shot down repeatedly. And what we have to realize is the cost of our approach is making us unbelievably inefficient, unproductive, and even in many cases disobedient. Today's church environment, it seems to me, is a very, very low trust environment. Not even our trust of other churches, congregations, or denominations, but our trust within house. We look at people with suspicion. This new preacher's come in here to preach, these newfangled ideas. There's a very low level of trust, and sometimes that's been warranted. Well, what kind of costs come when we lack trust? There's the cost of lack of cooperation amongst congregations, but there's also the cost of lack of cooperation amongst individuals within even the same congregation. We are stunted in our spiritual growth because we lack trust, and when we lack trust, we lack confession, we lack transparency, we lack authenticity. And if you're going to go deeper, you're going to have authenticity, transparency, and confession, or else you're just going to stay on the surface and you're not going to grow. It's costing you personally to be a suspicious person when it comes to the kingdom. Because we don't trust outsiders, we're not reaching out to people. And we're not able to share a testimony because it makes us so vulnerable. We're so suspicious. We're suspicious of bringing people into our churches because we're very comfortable there. We like it to be a certain way. And so we want people to look an awful lot like us. We're going to have to start building trust and being more open-handed, being more open-hearted toward other people if we're going to see the kingdom expand. And God wants to see his kingdom expand. Not only does he want it, he will see his kingdom expand. It's just a question of whether or not we would like to participate in God's kingdom mission, or whether or not we would like to create another mission that is not the mission that he gave us and make sure to be successful in that mission, which is stay comfortable, stagnate, go into decline, and eventually shut the doors. Because we don't trust each other, we are not growing even personally, even of our own faith, because we're not able to open up. How many invitation songs have you heard where no one moved a finger? It's because there's no trust. There's a little more to that. It's also because there's just too many people there to make that really a viable thing to execute on well with any effectiveness. But at the same time, even in small group, there's not really much confession. Even in one-on-one conversation, there's not really much confession. And it's because there's a lack of trust. So let's build that trust. Let's build those bridges. Let's open our hearts. And yes, you're going to get burned. It's going to come at a cost, but we already knew that from the beginning. Jesus always told us that it would come at a cost. You just can't avoid it. But the cost of not trusting is going to become greater than the cost of trusting and getting burned occasionally. I was reading again from Ying Kai, who's from China, and his approach to making disciples that is pretty speedy. And part of that is because there's a culture of trust that exists that makes things move a bit more quickly. But when he makes a disciple, when a disciple is made, they have then the very next day sharing the first lesson with someone new. They don't even wait a week. They don't even wait a month, a year, 10 years. It's the next day. It moves that quickly. So how do we build trust within our congregations? Well, it's not going to be based on 100% agreement. That's never going to happen. But it can be based upon a common direction, upon a common mission, and upon the ones of Ephesians chapter 4. He says in Ephesians 4 at verse 2, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. That's the kind of person you can trust. And out of that comes verse 3, every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So then there is one body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. That's an atmosphere and an environment of high trust. Where there is high trust, there will be high unity. And where there is high unity and high trust, there will be high efficiency and there will be high effectiveness. I cannot help but wonder if part of our ineffectiveness and inefficiency within Christianity, within our individual churches, is such a low degree of trust that we're having to reduplicate all of our efforts, we're having to reduplicate all of our facilities, we're having to reduplicate all of our budgets, all of our staff over and over and over exponentially. And we move very, very slow. We move very, very expensively. And so our output, our outcome is also very, very low. Covey makes the point in the book that trust is often built through two things. Through character, just like here in Ephesians 4, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. That's the kind of character of someone that you say, I believe it when they speak. I can trust where they go because they're trying to follow Jesus and they have the kind of character of someone who I want to be like. If we want to have trusting environments, we need to be people who are trustworthy. And that means we don't need to go do things that are untrustworthy. If someone shares a confidence with you, you don't go share that with others. As you get to know people, you get to know them open-handedly, open-heartedly, open-mindedly. Not coming in with suspicion from day one, not trying to pin them down or nail them down from day one, but trying to learn more about them, having an attitude of discovery, of generosity. And if we could not only work upon our character, but upon our competencies, because often people have no idea what discipleship is about, have no idea the skills that it takes to make a disciple, how to share their testimony, how to share the gospel, how to go on a prayer walk, how to train people in prayer, how to train people in fasting. We have a severe lack of competencies because we rolled all our eggs in the basket of the paid professional. And so there's low trust because the competency is low, because the character sometimes is low, because the suspicion is high, the trust doesn't exist. And so we move forward very slowly, very inefficiently, very expensively, reduplicating all sorts of efforts that have already been duplicated all over town. And so again, our fruit is often lacking. If we could just build that kind of trust, a trust that is based upon the work of the Spirit, trust that's based upon our unity in Christ, despite even some of our differences, we could learn to trust each other, that we're not fighting for our brand, that we're not fighting for the same group of people in town, the people who've moved in from other towns who might be looking for a church. We all think we're competing for that same group. It's because we're not looking to make new disciples who have an endless number of possibilities in a typical community. But building that kind of trust, which means you being a trustworthy person, would enable us to make a difference, would enable us to make an impact upon the poor, upon the hungry, upon the widow, upon the orphan. We wouldn't have to reduplicate our efforts. I mean, there's even groups that say orphans' homes are wrong. I mean, how much suspicion do you have to say orphans groups are sinful or wrong, or missionary groups are sinful or wrong, or Christian colleges sinful and wrong? It's like we can't even trust our own people. We can't even trust the church across town that's 99.99% shared DNA. Because somebody may say something that is not what it ought to be, and God apparently is not able to handle such a thing, and neither are we. Part of building trust means allowing people room to fail. It means allowing people room to get things wrong. But are they trying to be faithful? Are they striving to be obedient? Are they doing the best they can with what they know? That's the bigger question. So if you don't know the church across town, get to know the church across town. If you're the preacher, invite their preacher to lunch. Get to know them. Ask them questions. Have a spirit of inquiry, of discovery, of appreciation. And what you're going to find out is that those people are a lot more like you than you could have possibly imagined. And maybe that's why it's made it so hard for us to get along with them because we think we're in competition when we really should be in collaboration. So just some things that's been on my mind. If it helps you, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. But I love the fact that you're watching the channel. I'm going to put another one up here on the screen that I think will be helpful to you. Hope you'll watch that next, but take care.